Isaiah 60, where we're these last 7 chapters of Isaiah, you're going to hear some very familiar New Testament passages a little bit later. Not tonight necessarily, but we're going to hear those. What you're also going to hear, though, is we are at this section. We are looking at a very difficult passage to interpret, or a whole series of passages to interpret, because it depends on what your theological persuasion is on how you're going to understand this. If you are a premillennial person, you're going to understand it a certain way. That's where I am. I'm premillennial. And if you are a reformed person, you're going to deal with it differently. You're going to deal with it more figuratively. I'm going to deal with it more literally. As if there's actually going to be a time when what we're going to be reading tonight is going to be fulfilled. And when is that going to be? Well, I'll probably talk more about that in just a few moments. But to let you know where I believe it's going to fall, it's going to be during the millennial kingdom. The 1,000-year reign of Christ that we meet in Revelation chapter 20. It's after the Lord Jesus returns on the white horse, vanquishes his enemies, and establishes his kingdom. Now, the reason why I come to that position is there's many reasons, but one of the major reasons is it just fits. It seems to work. It seems to make sense. As some scholars would say, if the literal sense makes sense, so seek no other sense. I don't see it simply as symbolic. What are we talking about here? Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord will rise upon you. It's Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the focal point in what we're looking at tonight. And we might even get into a little bit of chapter 61. We'll see how that goes. So when is it going to be that this city that has been a site of conflict for 3,000 years or more, when is it going to be a place that there's no longer conflict over it, but it becomes a place of God's blessing, and also not simply for the Jews of that day, or the day we're talking about here, but it's going to be for the world. The Gentile world is going to be coming to Jerusalem, loving Jerusalem, seeking after Jerusalem. When is that going to be? Well, it hasn't happened in history. It has to be. Because there's no other time in history where you can look back to this event taking place, and it certainly does not exist now. Okay? So we go a little bit further and you'll see, look at verse 3, the Gentiles shall come to your light, and the kings to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes all around, verse 4, and see, they all gather together, they come to you. Now, if you can imagine being a Jew in captivity in Babylon, reading maybe sometime you go to a gathering and a rabbi reads from Isaiah chapter 60, you're thinking, oh, when will that be? It never has been. When will it be the day that the Gentiles will actually come? And they're even going to do more than just simply come. They're going to bring their treasures and give to Jerusalem. Look at verse 5. They shall see and become radiant, and your heart will swell. I love this. Will swell with joy. With joy. It's interesting. It's interesting to me that this is the kind of picture that Isaiah is painting about what's going to happen one day. Then they will come and see, I heard that part, because of the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the Gentiles shall come to you. The Gentiles, the Goyim, the nations, the multitude of camels will cover the land. And it talks about other things. They shall bring gold and incense. They shall proclaim the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered to you. Latter part of verse 7. And they shall ascend, except and with acceptance on my altar, and I will glorify the house of my glory. And even though I didn't read every single description, you can see there that there is something that's going to take place one day that not only is there's going to be blessing for the Jew, there's going to be almost like a magnetic attraction for the Gentiles. And the focal point is going to be in Jerusalem. When is that? When can that possibly be? Well, I again would just affirm one more time at least that we're talking about the millennial kingdom. When Christ himself literally sits upon the throne in Jerusalem, and from there he rules the world for a 1,000-year period of time. A literal 1,000 years, I'm okay with that. Some would argue maybe not a literal 1,000, but nevertheless a long, protracted period of time. I just think the Bible is its word. It says 1,000. I'll just call it 1,000, and understand it that way. And it's just with him reigning as king. And you see, you see there's a necessity to this millennial kingdom. And the necessity is when you look at the Old Testament and the prophecies there, you have the idea that Messiah one day is going to rule the nations. I want you to listen to this. Don't have to go too far from where we are right here. One of the Psalms that is used so many times in the New Testament is Psalm 110. And I want you to listen to this. It says, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand when..." Two pages stuck together. "Till I make your enemies your footstool. And the Lord shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion to rule in the midst of your enemies. And your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power, in the beauties of holiness, from the womb of the morning until the dew of your youth. The Lord has sworn, and he will not relent. You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek." A lot of stuff packed into this particular psalm, but it's just one example of many, many different psalms talking about that one day Jesus will reign over the nations. And you can see that fleshed out in the New Testament as well. You have in the 10th chapter of Genesis, you have the table of nations. And then just right after that, 11, you have why there is all these nations. It is because of battle. It's not there in chronological order, so don't get confused that way. But the table of nations is just a summary of the nations, and then later we'll understand why they have all these nations. And they were scattered. And they went to different regions, different boundaries, different parts of the world. And because of that, there was God zeroing in and choosing a people for himself. So when you count the different nations in the table of nations, depending on how you divide it up and how it's divided up, you'll have either 70 or 72. Okay? Now, the interesting thing about that is in Luke's Gospel, Jesus sends out how many of his disciples? 70, or sometimes it says 72. Why? Why does it do that? Why did Jesus do that? Well, there's a symbolic nature to it. Because that's the table of nations, you have that many different nations. The geographic area, you may have a map in the back of your Bible. It talks about maybe the first, second, and then the third missionary journey of Paul. If you would go back and look at those nations, the table of nations, you will discover that Paul is going to those nations. And the last one, we don't have a record of him actually going there, but we know he was going there. That was Spain. That is one of the last, the furthest nations away from the Middle East at that time. And Paul was going, that's what his desire was. He was taking the gospel to the Gentiles, but what Gentiles? To the nations, you see. And we were told that. We're told that. So you have that as somewhat of a promise and as a prophecy that one day Christ will rule over the nations. You'll see this motif. That's what scholars call it. A kind of fancy word, a motif. It's throughout Scripture. Basically, the idea is a subject there, or emphasis, I guess is a better way of saying it. And you have, well, let me give you an example of that. Take the temptations of Jesus, for example. What was the last one?
All the kingdoms of the world. The temple.
The last one in Matthew's Gospel and Mark is the nations. Satan takes him to a high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world, and he says to Jesus, "You fall down, pay homage to me, and I'll give you the nations because they're mine." And we look at that and we go, "Oh, well," but once you understand that Jesus came not simply for the Jew, but for the nations, you can understand, now you understand why that was basically a major temptation. Not that Jesus would cave to it, but even Satan himself understood that he came to redeem the nations. Satan, I'm sure, did not understand the full ramifications of that or how that was going to occur, but nevertheless, Jesus was going to do that very thing. He was going to gather the nations to himself. And that's what you get in Revelation. You have every nation, every tongue, every people is all represented there. That make sense to you? I hope it does, because it is definitely a biblical theme. And the only time, and you know, that as far as the history of this world is going to be when Christ reigns as king from Jerusalem over the world. And there's going to be a time, there's just peace. You know, the swords will be, you know, converted into a plow and that kind of thing. There won't be any war or anything like that. And then at the end of that 1,000-year period, Satan, who has been contained in the abyss, the bottomless pit, will be set free to tempt the nations one more time. And he'll raise a rebellion, because we're still talking about millions and millions of people who are still fallen people. And he will deceive them, and they will rise against Christ. Yes?
Is this part of this is why all those nations were there on the day of Pentecost?
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly why.
Otherwise you read that list and you go, what?
Why are we even told that? It could have been much simpler to simply say, Jews from all over, they were there in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It didn't have to get specific about which nation we're talking about, and that's what they did. You know, the nations. So, and that is. What you find in Pentecost is a reversal of Babel. At Babel, the languages are confused, but on Pentecost, they spoke in other languages of the people that were there, their native languages. So you have the reversal of it. Okay, very good. We go on a little bit further. You still have this glorying or glorification of Jerusalem is going to take place. It's going to take place. And as you read on down through here at the other descriptives of it, look at verse 10. The sons of foreigners shall build up your walls, and their kings shall minister to you. For my wrath I struck you, but my favor I have had mercy on you. Therefore your gates shall be open continually. They shall not be shut day or night, that men may bring to you the wealth of the Gentiles and their kings in procession. For the nation and the kingdom which will not serve you shall perish, and those nations shall be utterly ruined. You still get the picture of what's going on. It'll be the Gentiles that will be attracted to the Jewish people, which is within itself a major reversal, is it not? Anti-Semitism has been around for a long, long time, and it wasn't that long ago we realized that it is very much alive still on college campuses, university campuses. When we had all of the students, shouting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And it just, why is there such hatred? Why is such hatred tolerated? You pick out any other kind of group, and you won't find that kind of protest. You just don't. But against Israel or against Jews, you find it very much alive. There's going to be a day when that will not be. It's going to be exactly the opposite. So, questions or comments before we go any further?
This 1,000 years has always intrigued me, and I'm sure others has ideals too. But do you think during that time, will life as we know it, will it continue like we have air travel? Will buildings be built sky high, or will it be just like living in cave days, but Jesus in control? Will there still be technology and advancements made in science?
It really, there's a lot that we're not told.
No, we're not.
And one of the questions I have wrestled with for a number of years was, okay, when you look at the sequence there in the ending chapters of Revelation, just prior to getting there, you have Jesus coming on the white horse, vanquishing his enemies, and then he sets up his kingdom in chapter 20. Satan's bound, people are not going to be tempted anymore, and then you'll have those who have already been resurrected that are going to be alive or participants in this reign of Christ. You have them there. You have they're present. But, so where do the people come from that rebel in the end? Where do those folks come from? Well, it seems to be, and you hear me underscore the word seems to be, it seems to make sense that there's going to be people entering into the millennium that are still in their natural bodies. And they will marry, they will have children, and their children will have children, and their children's children will have children. And you're going to have still fallen human beings living in this kingdom that at the end of the millennium, they will rise up because they'll be deceived. When Satan's set free, they'll be deceived. They haven't been under the influence, as it were, of Satan. And then you'll have the people rising up against him because of that. And then to be finally, once and for all, totally vanquished. And then the eternity will begin.
So who are those people? They missed the rapture, apparently.
Well, there's a lot more going on there.
Okay.
You have. It's where the sequence of things are kind of. You have. This is going to be very, very simplistic, so I apologize in advance. You have, let's make it like a timeline. Here is the resurrection. Jesus has already been resurrected, and then followed 50 days later was Pentecost. Okay, you got Pentecost there. Well, the timeline goes on. And somewhere, right now, where we are right now, for many we'll just call it the church age. I don't know how long this period is going to be. Just don't know. Is it going to be, it's over been 2,000 years. Is it going to be 2,500 years? Is it going to be 2,100 years? Well, I don't know. But there's going to come a time when there's going to be the rapture. Okay? And what happens during the rapture, and this is debatable, about the timing. Some people believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. Some believe a mid-tribulation rapture. Some believe in a post-tribulation rapture. I think, from the way I understand it, it's the pre-trib. So what happens here? This is when those Christians who are ready, at that time, are raptured. They're removed. That's what you find in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. The Lord Himself will descend from heaven with a shout, the voice of the archangel, the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. And then we who are alive and remain will be caught up. There's the word, caught up. That when it's in the Latin, that's where we get the word rapture from. Harpozo. Anyway, you have the rapture, but then you have a 7-year period, the tribulation. Okay? That we know, because it's mentioned in Daniel's, quite specific. It falls in 2 sections, 242 months, 3.5 years. First 3.5 is not what you think of the tribulation. It seems like a time of peace. During this time, the Antichrist will rise. He will rule. People will think he's the best thing since sliced bread. It's going to take over. We don't know if he's going to come before or after the rapture, but somewhere in that vicinity. But then at the end of the 7-year period is the second coming. That's what you find in Revelation chapter 19. At the end of that, Jesus comes on a white horse, sword from His mouth, with the armies of heaven, and He comes back, this time to the earth. In the rapture, it doesn't say that He comes to the earth, but in the second coming, He seems to come to the earth. He comes to the Mount of Olives, and it splits. And whatnot. So, and at this point, after this, that is when the millennium will be. The millennium. 1,000 years. And then I'm running out of space here. Then at the end of this 1,000 years, Satan, who has been bound from here on, he will be let loose and he will deceive the nations again. So here, during this, after the tribulation, Jesus comes back. There will be people alive during the tribulation period, and many of those, I have no idea who they will be or how many there will be, but they will live on into the millennium, and they will. But see, they're still in their natural bodies. They haven't been resurrected. They have not been. They do not have their glorified bodies. So people continue there, and then at the end of the millennium, that's when they will rise in rebellion once again against God, against Christ. Does that make sense to you? That's very simplistic, but that seems to be somewhat of the chronology of what we're talking about. Yes?
The whole New Jerusalem coming down to earth, that cube that's half as big as the United States, where's that?
That will be over here.
Okay.
That's when chapter 21 is fulfilled of Revelation. And that's where you have the new heavens. I, John, saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and first earth had passed away, no longer any sea. And I saw the new Jerusalem descending from God out of heaven, like a bride adorned for her husband. Just giving us an idea of the beauty of what it looks like. And then twice in verse 3, it talks about that God will dwell with His people. It literally is God will pitch His tent, or He will tabernacle among His people. The interesting thing here, if I might express it, is we usually think of, because in our current state, that when a person dies, we even say, a Christian goes to heaven. The person is in heaven. What we mean by heaven is basically in the presence of God. All right? However, when you read the Bible and look at it somewhat holistically, you find in in Revelation 1, excuse me, in not Revelation, in Genesis, you find that God comes to the garden and he walks, he relates to with Adam. And probably Eve too. It's not specifically said because we give the name Adam to the man. But the word Adam means the man. Adam, the man. So we call him that, but really he's called the man. And Eve is called the woman. Now, not to get too technical, but when you get to the creation of the woman, there's a different word there that's used for man. It's ish. And she is Isha, taken from the man, the woman. And the completer, the helper, the one who's called alongside that helps him, that completes him, and he, her, that kind of thing. And understand that Adam names her too. He's the one that names her Eve because she is a mother of all living. Now, I can go 1,000 directions there, but that's not where I want to go right now. So we have Revelation here. You have Revelation 2 and 3 where you have that relationship. Then you have the fall. What happens because of the fall? Because of Adam's rebellion against God. Eve was deceived. Adam knew full well what he was doing. And because of their rebellion against God, both of them are now fallen. Not only did they fall, so did the entire creation. Things changed. And it changed dramatically. When you go all the way through the Bible and you get to Revelation 21, and you have this restored. What do I mean by that? Well, when you look at verse 3, you find that twice in there that God Himself will dwell among them. It's not that we all go to heaven and be with God. He actually comes back to be with us. So what he started here, He restores here. So what you understand here is that there is no plan B. God doesn't change His desire, His will, His plan. Even though sin enters, even though all the fallenness does what it does, He still is going to do in chapter 21 what He began here in Genesis 2 and 3. This is why all of this is necessary. Because God is restoring what man messed up. He restores what He originally designed to do. So when you read Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 through 4, read that with this in mind. And it makes sense. That's what God is going to do. Okay. So back to this. This must be a reference to the millennium. When is it going to be that Israel as a nation, but specifically Jerusalem, becomes that place that not only do the Jews swell with joy, but that people from all these different nations, they are attracted to. They're going to rebuild, they're going to bless materially Jerusalem. And I don't know if you thought about this or not. Jerusalem is an odd place, geographically speaking, to become a capital. It's just odd. Strategically speaking, David could have chosen a lot of other places within the boundaries of ancient Israel that would have been what many of us would probably guess would be a better capital. I mean, he could have went up to Megiddo. It had trade routes passing right by it. You have outside of Megiddo, you have the Jezreel Plain, or Armageddon, what it's later be referred to. You have that beautiful plain that stretches for miles and miles and miles, just green and lush and beautiful. He could have chosen that to be the capital, but he didn't. He chose Jerusalem. Hard to get there. It's in the hill country. I ain't talking about little rounded hills. I'm talking about very steep areas. It's dry. They don't have great water sources. I mean, there's spring there and that kind of thing, but it's not like they were just had a lot of. They're right on, not too far from the wilderness. But it's just interesting when I begin talking about that, even though I haven't done a very good job explaining everything. That's the city. That's the one that God chose. And that's why David chose it. That's why it becomes such a vital place, is because God undoubtedly inspired David, this is going to be my capital. And it's kind of like in the center of the world. It's very, very important. And there's going to be a time when its importance is even going to be magnified all the more. Why is it going to be magnified all the more? It's because of who is seated there on a throne. That's why. That's why. You find, we could go, again, a lot of different directions. And making sense? Got questions? Comments? Something you want to add to it?
That's some of why the world hates Jerusalem, Israel, all of that. Why they're trying to wipe them off into the sea.
Sure. And Israel is a nation, is a city that has been fought over for millennia. It's been fought over. Now, on even though I just played one song, if I go to that first track up there, you would hear the actual communication during the 6-day war, when the Jews captured Jerusalem. For the first time in 2,000 years, Jerusalem was back in the hands of the Jews. Now, you probably won't understand it because it's in Hebrew, okay? But and you'll just listen to the exhilaration in the voices, how excited they are that Jerusalem was back in the hands. Now, if you go to Jerusalem today, there's 4 quarters. You go, there's a Jewish quarter, and there's also the Palestinian quarter, and there's a Christian quarter, and there's another quarter, and I can't remember what it is right now. But it's still a divided city, and you can tell when you go from one to the other. You can tell. And there's the old city, and it's just fascinating to see some of those things. But nevertheless, one day Jerusalem won't be one that people are fighting over. It's going to be one that people are attracted to. That has not happened in history. It hasn't happened in history. But you and I do not understand. We do not understand the special nature among Jewish people that Jerusalem has. How it holds them. Daniel in Babylon, who never returned to Jerusalem, what did he do? He had a window that opened up to the south, but it was placed where he'd pray facing Jerusalem. I'm even told, though I've never been at a Jewish Seder, one of the last things they say after the Seder meal is over, the Passover meal is over, is next year, Jerusalem. That's the special, I guess, the nationalistic memory even for Jews who have never been there. They love the city. Love the city. And there's something very important about that too. Oh, but so as we move down through here and talk about that particular thing, look at the verses 19 through 22, you still have that blessing of the Jewish people, blessing of the world itself, all the nations, and the blessing of Jerusalem. Now, I'm just going to introduce chapter 61. We're not going to get into it in a lot of major detail. This is a very important chapter. Not that the others are not, but this is a direct messianic chapter that Jesus used to launch his ministry, his earthly ministry. When he went home to Nazareth, flip over and find it. Okay. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to move to the New Testament. This is what it says. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach the good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Now, I'm going to stop right there because that's where Jesus stops. What continues, though, in verse 2 is, "And the day of the vengeance of my God, to comfort all who mourn, to console those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes and the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees or oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that He, the Lord, may be glorified." Now, Jesus, He started His ministry. He's been tempted in the desert by the evil one. He's after His baptism, His launch into ministry, and He goes home. He goes home to Nazareth. Now, Nazareth is where He grew up. And I want you to listen to this particular. It's in chapter 4 of Luke's Gospel, verses 16 and following. "So He came to Nazareth, where He had been brought up. And as was His custom, He went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. And He was handed the book of Isaiah the prophet. And when He had opened the book, He found the place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. And He sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord.' Then He closed the book, gave it back to the attendant. He sat down, and the eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on Him. And He began to say to them, 'Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing.' So all bore witness to Him, and marveled at the gracious words which proceeded out of His mouth. And they said, 'Is this not Joseph's son?'" Okay? So they're amazed. So exactly what was Jesus saying? Well, He was quoting from Isaiah right here, talking about the Spirit of the Lord being upon Him, and his mission is to do. And then He tells those that are listening, "Today, in your hearing, this passage has been fulfilled." And the response is great. It's great. The people are, it says, and all bore witness to Him, and they marveled at the graciousness of His words, and proceeded out of His mouth. In other words, it was very well received. So what was He saying? Well, He was saying the year of Jubilee is here. And the year of Jubilee is not simply a date, it's a person. This is what I am going to do. This is why it's fulfilled. The Jubilee is now here. Now, if you understand what Jubilee is, you understand that it's 7 Sabbath years. A Sabbath year is every 7 years. And then the 50th year, after the 49th year, is the year of Jubilee. Lots take place. Prisoners are set free. Slaves are given their freedom. Debts are forgiven. People who have lost their property because of hard times or whatever, that property is to be restored and given back to them. By the way, there's no record of the Jews ever observing Jubilee. You can understand why. Greed, primarily, yes. But what he says that. So that sounds great. They're happy. Good deal. Jubilee's here. Finally, it's here. But then Jesus goes on and he says something that ticks them off. And he said to them, "You will surely say this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself. Whatever we've heard you done in Capernaum, do also here in your country.' Then he said, 'Assuredly I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was great famine throughout the land. But to none of them was Elijah sent, except Zarephath, to a region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha, the prophet. And none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian.' So all those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath, rose up and thrust him out of the city, and they led him to throw him down a hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him off a cliff. But passing through them, in the midst of them, he went on his way." Okay? What happened?
They got mad.
They did get mad. It was more than just mad. Jesus said something that took their glowing embrace of what he just read to the place of where they were ready to kill him over it. And what it is may kind of escape us a little bit unless we're familiar with the people that he mentions. He uses 2 examples, Elijah and Elisha. He talks about Elijah first, that during the days of the 3.5 years no rain, that particular famine period of time, Elijah was sent to a widow's house, a Gentile widow. Not to Jewish widows, but to a pagan widow. Elisha, in his day, and another example that Jesus cited, it was not simply there were a lot of lepers in Israel during the days of Elisha, but it wasn't to any of those that God showed mercy. It was to Naaman, the Syrian, a non-Jew, a Gentile. See, and that was unthinkable for them. God hates Gentiles. God made Gentiles for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to have fuel to stoke the fires of hell. That's the only reason. They're not worth anything. They're not the chosen people. But here what Jesus was saying, okay, Jubilee's here. Messiah is here. It's fulfilled in your hearing. And let me tell you what it means. It means also Gentiles are included in this. And they're ready to kill him over it. I'm going to make an interesting side kind of statement. If you look at the medieval through the Renaissance, these portraits of Jesus, you get an impression that Jesus was a little bit feminine and probably not very strong because of the models that they used for many of those paintings. Did you get the picture here that you think Jesus was weak physically? He walked right through them. They pushed him out. They're going to throw him off a cliff. And he just walks through them. He's no wimp at all. He's no, scrawny little guy. He just walks right through them. He's, pretty strong. Anyway, that's not the only thing we're talking about. It's just a kind of a side issue I want you to be aware of. So, we're Jesus, this is fulfilled. Great news. Until he said Gentiles were also invited. Not so great news. That shows you the depth of the prejudice that the Jewish of that day, the Israelis of that day, they had toward non-Jewish people. And you can understand to some degree how that developed. That you have the nations, basically God is sending them on their way, but then He chooses Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the descendants of Jacob, children of Israel, that kind of thing. They were the people that God had chosen. They were His people. And He made an everlasting covenant with them. Not one that could ever be broken. One that would never be broken. And they got to the place of seeing that, since God chose us, we are the special ones. Failing to realize what their purpose was in being God's people. And why did they receive the law? Why did God do all that He did in Israel's history? Why did Messiah come from a Jewish lineage? Why all of this? Why? Well, what the Jewish people of yesterday were supposed to be. They were to live among all these nations. And they were to be an example. If you want to know what the people of God look like, look at these people. These people are the people of God. You want to see what they're like? Well, I'll tell you what they're not like. They're not like the pagans. They don't worship like them. They don't chase after the false gods like them. They don't live like them. They have such a high standard, and this relationship they have with the Most High God, the one and only. But they struggled with that. They went after the gods of the nations. And that's why they ended up in captivity in Babylon. Because of that being faithless instead of being faithful. And they were disciplined as a nation because of that. But the promises were never, ever revoked. God continued to work through His people, desiring to work through His people. The interesting thing, though, full circle, is one day it's going to become clear. It's going to become clear. I got 5 minutes. I want to read one other thing to you. It's Old Testament, if you're wondering. I'm not going to tell you where it is right yet. I just want you to listen. And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for the firstborn. In that day there shall be great mourning in Jerusalem, and the land shall mourn, and every family by itself, the family in the house of David by itself, etc., etc., and all the families that remain, every family by itself, and their wives by themselves. What's going to happen? Well, though I didn't give you all the context, it's in Zechariah chapter 12. And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. And they will look on me whom they have pierced. Now, I want you to put the pieces together here. Who is me?
Jesus.
Yes, but in context, it's God. It's Yahweh. But he said, but as he writes this, you see, if you back up a little bit, in that day the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and it's Lord in caps, so it is God's name. The one who is feeble among them in that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, like the angel of the Lord before them. It shall be on that day that I will seek and to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And I will pour. So you see the continuity there? And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me, whom they have pierced. You see that the interesting thing, among many interesting things, but the thing I want to point out here is that there will come a time when the Jewish people themselves, the realization of who Jesus truly is, will be embraced by them. Paul tells us that in Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11, that there's a partial hardening, but when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, all Israel will be saved. That doesn't mean every single Jew. They're talking about a massive movement of Israel, the people, of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're going to embrace Jesus as their Messiah. And that too, when's that? That's still yet future. Make sense to you?
Where was that found, Pastor?
That is in Zechariah chapter 12. So you can read that. The part that I began with is verses 10 and following. But you need to back up and discover who's speaking. Because I just said, and I will pour out. But if you back up, you realize who the I is. It's God Himself. All right. Thank you much.
Thank you.
And I'm perfect. Right on the dot.